Hello there. In this video, we're going to go in depth in terms of the Bigme B251 all-in-one PC. However, we're only going to focus on its aspects as a monitor. So I'll use a different video to kind of delve into the computer side of the all-in-one portion. And I actually have another video to talk about other use cases outside of a monitor or a PC. So those will come down the line. But this is all about the monitor. Now I want to say a few things before we get into it. First off, I want to talk about pixel density. Normally when you have these devices, you're looking for a pixel density of 217 or something like that, or 300 even ideally for black and white. And then Kaleido devices like 10-inch devices and 8-inch devices will have color at about 150 ppi. Well, that's not the case with monitors. They're very different. And I actually didn't even realize this, but the monitor I used at work, for example, and I never thought of it either being a really good monitor or a really bad monitor, just was fine. It was usually around like 95 ppi. My home monitor, which I think is a really good monitor, is approaching 110 ppi. And indeed, anywhere between 90 and 110 it tends to be preferable. So it's a different world than we think of like phones and tablets and e-ink devices. Now, what's interesting about this device is that it's actually 150 ppi for black and white, which is outside that range, and 75 ppi for color, below the range. And so what would that look like? That was one of the things I was definitely curious about going into this review. And I think what you'll see in the images is, generally speaking, it's not a problem that we're at 150 ppi on black text. That looks great in a lot of these images that we're going to see. But in terms of color, you do see a lot of pixelation, dots. It's not a pure color palette in many cases. It's not terrible. I was actually surprised. I thought it might be unusable. It's definitely something you notice, but it's not as bad as I'd feared. So anyway, we're going to get about 25 minutes after this introduction of just focusing the camera on the device, and you'll be able to see for yourself, but I wanted to at least to paint that picture. Speaking of which, one of the things I don't believe I've talked about before in terms of why I do my videos is because you can't go to the store like a Best Buy or other electronic store in most cases and see these devices out in the open where you can interact with them, which is a real shame. So what I try to do in a lot of my videos, particularly like the visual tour videos, but others as well, is I just try to simulate the next best experience. It's almost like being able to go to the store. You can't touch the device yourself, but you can look over the shoulder of someone who is with an unobscured view. And you don't have to worry about a salesperson bothering you or a limit on your time. So that's really the impetus for why I do a lot of my videos. Well, in this particular video, I maintain that philosophy, but I did it slightly differently. Because you see in other videos, I tend to tighten up the video so there's not a lot of dead air time. So there's a lot more editing that's going on. I edited these video clips as well. I did some trimming, but I didn't do as much as I usually do. And the thought process behind that is that it kind of let the video breathe, and I think ultimately told a more accurate story of what it's like to interact with the monitor, both good and bad. So there is a little more dead time as a result of that, but I think the upshot of that is that you'll really get a good sense and feel of what this monitor is, what it can do, and what it can't do, just like you were able to go to a store and see it firsthand yourself. So that's the hope anyway. And I know a lot of people skip around and only watch, a fraction of what's filmed anyway, so I wasn't too concerned about that. But I just wanted to throw that out there, that yeah, there's a little more time that I might have trimmed normally in other videos. I kind of left it in because it just felt like it did a better job of telling the overall story that way. Okay, so with that, we're going to go right into the video. We're going to focus on the monitor. We're going to go over all the ways you can interact with the monitor, all the different settings that are available, We'll look at the different video modes and see how those perform. And I think you'll have a really good sense at the end of this video what it's like to have a Kaleido 3 Eink color monitor. All right, let's get to it. There are 3 ways that you can control the monitor and go through its settings. The first is through the buttons here on the side. There's 6 buttons, so we'll kind of quickly walk through that. The second and probably more preferable way is through the remote, which does do most of the functions on the buttons, and I'll explain what's unique to the buttons, but then we'll go over this as well. And then there's a third mode, which is through voice commands. And there's actually quite a few voice commands to use on the monitor. So all 3 methods can be used as a way of changing some of the settings on the monitor. So we'll start off with the buttons. And there are 6 buttons here on the side. There's a very faint image of what each button does. It's not particularly discernible, frankly, and so you kind of have to memorize what the buttons do. Not a big fan of the usage of the buttons, but I should point out that generally speaking, I'm not a fan of monitor buttons anyway. On my standard monitor, which I have behind this one, I just use the buttons to set up my monitor, and I don't touch them beyond that. And that's kind of my feeling toward these buttons as well. But we'll walk through those very quickly just to give a sense of what's available. There are a couple things that the buttons can do that you can't do on the remote or with voice commands. So for example, refresh the screen is this first button. So if you click on this, it refreshes the screen accordingly. And that's the only place where you can do that. There's also a little informational menu that comes up. And there it is, and that's only available by clicking on the second button. The second button also functions as a back button in the other menus. If we go to the third button down, this is the main menu for the monitor, and we can use the 4th and 5th buttons to scroll through. So you have your different refresh modes. Let's go the other way. We have your front lighting, and there's cold and warm lighting, so we'll walk through that in a little bit. Then you've got on and off on the front lighting. You've got volume meter as well as on and off on the volume meter. And then you have the inputs, and finally you can reset all of the settings. So for example, if we go into these refresh modes, under each mode there's a setting to do both contrast and vividness, and so hitting reset resets all of those. But that's basically it for the side buttons. If you're not in a menu mode, some of the side buttons, like the 4th one is a shortcut into the front lighting, and the 5th one is a shortcut into the input selector. So it's pretty standard, not a lot of options that are available on the monitor, and most of those you can do through this remote as well. So for example, as relates to the audio volume, you've got your mute button there, which is both on and off. I have a sports match going on in the background, so that's why you heard that. In fact, let's put that on real quickly. Just web mode. So that's a vocal command I just used to switch between modes. We'll go into that a little bit more depth. Continuing with back to the remote, however, where we started, which was the speakers. These speaker buttons only work for the monitor's internal speakers. Hey, it's a goal. So if you're using a Bluetooth speaker, which actually is preferred, the speakers on this monitor aren't particularly great, then these buttons are not going to work, nor will these buttons on the side for your Bluetooth speaker. Your Windows button will work. So you either have to use that or the speaker itself to change volume. You can't use these buttons, only for the internal speakers. Let me get off this so it's not too distracting. Where's my mouse? Whoops. Okay. Going back to the remote, it's fairly self-explanatory. You can toggle your front lighting on or off using this button in the middle. And then you can change the settings using the side buttons. So we can turn this on, and I can go higher on the cold lighting. So let's see what that looks like by going all the way. Like so. And then you can turn it down by clicking on this button right there. I think if I hit OK, yeah, OK will take me down to the warm lighting. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. Like so. In fact, let's go ahead and do full warm and cold lighting so we can see how bright it can get. And there it is. Now, one comment about front lighting. So right now, again, we have full warm and full cold on. Let's make that image a little bit better. I'm going to use my voice command, image mode. There we go. That's the highest resolution that's available. Generally speaking, the monitor looks better without the front lighting on. The front lighting's fairly good in the sense that it's definitely very uniform across the screen. You don't see it being brighter in one side than the other. For example, maybe a touch of bleed down below, but because that's where the status bar is, it doesn't really stick out. But otherwise, quite good. But I find that the screen looks better without front lighting. Let me go ahead and turn that off. And it just looks a little bit darker, which kind of makes it look a little bit nicer, in my opinion. The reason why I can use the monitor in this mode, however, is because I have a light which I've got set up right over there, just a few feet away. Normally in this room, I have a light that's basically that way, about 8 feet away, and it's not sufficient. So I really need the front lighting to be able to use the monitor. Oh, that's a voice command in action there. Let me go ahead and turn that off. So something to keep in mind, it's better without the lighting, but in a lot of environments it's going to be necessary unless you have really good ambient lighting. Anyway, continuing along the remote, this is just a standard, input button as well as, navigation arrows. And then you've got a back button, you've got your input button, and finally your menu, which we've looked at already through the side buttons. So that brings us to the third mode of changing the settings on the monitor, which is vocal commands. Now, one thing to point out is that the vocal commands are always on as long as the monitor is on. So there's no button you have to press to be able to activate it. That's the good news. The bad news is it could inadvertently activate if you say something that it thinks is a voice command, or if it hears something through the speakers. So that's one of the downsides of that. But there is quite a bit of convenience to a lot of these commands, and we're going to walk through all whopping 23 of them here. And they're all surrounded things like the lighting, the image mode, and the sound. So those are the three categories. And we'll start with the lighting. Here's command number 1. Turn on the front light. Let's try that again. Turn on the front light. There we go. Turn off the front light. Okay. Turn on cold light. Okay. Turn off cold light. Turn on warm light. Turn off warm light. Brighten the front light. Dim the front light. Brighten the warm light. Dim the warm light. Let's try that again. Dim the warm light. There we go. Dim the cold light. Brighten the cold light. Brighten the cold light. All right, and that's basically all of the verbal commands as it relates to lighting. turn off the front light. Very good. Let's do some of the volume ones then. Increase volume. Increase volume. Not sure if that worked. Let's take a look here. Yes. Increase volume. Increase volume. May not work while I'm in the menu. Increase volume. Yes, see how it went to 5. Let's get rid of the menu. Decrease volume. Didn't work that time. Let's try this again. Decrease. Oh, I'm sorry. That's the wrong command. Reduce volume. Reduce volume. Reduce volume. See? That went down. Volume up. Let's go to mute. Volume up. Volume down. Volume down. Let's try that again. Reduce volume. There we go. Turn on volume. It's probably on, but it's at 0. Turn off volume. There we go. Turn on volume. Mute. 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 There we go. Again, fighting a little bit of the volume in that case. The speakers, that is. Okay, so those are basically the volume controls. Let's go ahead and go through the different refresh modes. We'll start with video mode, which I think we're on. Text mode. There we go. Picture mode. And web mode. So you can swiftly go between modes by using these verbal commands. So I personally have found these verbal commands around these modes to be actually the most useful. And we'll walk through what the different modes look like, and you can kind of get a sense of why that is. All right, so let's take a little bit of a deeper look at these modes. And we're going to start with looking at this particular image. This is a bridge in Budapest. And we're currently looking at the top, the most detailed mode, which is known as image mode. And every mode has 2 sliders that you can play with. It has a contrast and a vividness slider. So let's take a look at that. We'll start with the vividness slider. I'm going to use my remote to pull up the menu. And this secondary slider is the vividness one. So let's take a look. I think the green bridge is a great example of this in action. So we're currently at 0. Let's go all the way to the top. Like so. We'll go ahead and back out of this. There we go. And we'll refresh the screen. So the green, I think, pops a lot more with the vividness set to its highest value. Let's take a look at the impact of contrast. And we will also go to the top value on that. Okay, you can see it's much darker. We'll go ahead and clear this out. Refresh the screen. And so there's that impact. I'm generally finding that having no contrast to maybe just a little bit is the best, because it allows, you can see you lose some details when it's this dark. So having it toward the left either at 0 or at 1. Make sure you can see the details. 1 or 2 allows you to kind of, it makes the screen look just a little bit sharper as a result of that. So let's go ahead and take that down to 1 as an example. Here we go. Okay. We'll refresh. And so there's kind of a nice balance there. We've got the colors popping a little bit, relatively speaking, and then and the darkness does make it look a little bit better, but again, you lose a little bit of detail. Like let's, for example, look right there in the bridge. Let's go ahead and go back and set contrast to 0. And back out of here. Refresh the screen. And so you notice you can see the lattice. You could make it out when it was darker, but it was a lot harder to see. It's a lot easier to see now that the contrast is at 0. So what I'm going to do is on all the other modes, I'm going to set the contrast to 0 and the vividness to high, and that way we'll be looking at the same settings for each of the 4 modes. Okay, so all the modes are set with the same contrast and vividness. So let's kind of cycle through. So again, we're starting here at the best mode for images, image mode. And let's go ahead and take a look at web mode. There we go. See, the colors got a lot lighter as a result. Let's go ahead and go into text mode. Text mode. Not sure if it took that command. Let's take a look. Yes, it did. Sometimes you can tell by the screen flashing and sometimes you can't. Video mode. Video mode. Let me validate whether it made that change. It did. Okay. Now, the key difference between these 4 modes, as you can see, sometimes it's not obvious from the image which mode you're in. You can always tell when you're in image mode because it looks the best in that particular mode. You can also tell by the behavior of the mouse. So notice my mouse pointer is here. I'm going to go ahead and move that mouse. And notice how choppy that mouse is. It'd be very difficult to work with the mouse in this mode. All right, let's contrast that with web mode. Okay, so again, our mouse is right here. Much smoother. Like, let me go over here to the dark side. Much smoother operation. Still a little bit choppy, but you can definitely work with this. All right, let's go to text mode. All right, let me just validate that we're in that mode. Okay, we are. Okay, the mouse is a little choppier in this mode. So generally speaking, I'm finding with text mode is if I'm in a web page and some of the text is really light, that's when I go into text mode because it'll bolden those better than the other modes. I don't use text mode for any other particular reason. In fact, even typing, you're fine using some of the other modes. Let's go into the last one, which is video mode. Okay, let me just validate that we're in that mode. Yep. All right, we'll get out and let's take a look at the mouse. So much smoother in this mode. Generally, I'm finding that the 2 modes, particularly web mode, which we're in now, as well as, I'm sorry, we were in video mode, as well as web mode, are very similar. I'm tending to find web mode to being a little bit better, and that's my general use mode. where if I want to take a look at images in the highest quality, that would be image mode. Then I'll use text mode if I'm trying to make really light text a little bit bolder. And those are basically how to use the different modes. I think having voice commands for these things is really helpful because it allows you to switch fairly quickly between modes. So that is a nice feature, despite the fact that sometimes it confuses it and changes it based on what it's hearing through the speakers. Or there are actually some cases where it will randomly, it seems, change modes. It doesn't happen too often, thankfully, but there have been a few instances of that as I've been working with this device. Okay, so here we are in Microsoft Word, and I thought we would take a look at the behavior of the various modes as it relates to writing and text. So let's begin with web mode. Okay, and okay, let's switch over to text mode. All right, the bad typing is user error, but you can see there's not a lot of difference between the what it looks like when you type between the two modes. Let me just make sure that it did in fact capture me in text mode. Yep, absolutely. Okay, let's keep going then. Let's go on to image mode. Okay, so a lot choppier in that particular mode. Let's go ahead and finish off then with video mode. Oh my goodness. I'm typing on my lap, so it's not the best experience. And there you have it. So pretty similar. But again, that kind of emphasizes the point that I made earlier that, just being in web mode is generally a really good mode for most of the things you're going to do. And text mode is specific to situations where you want the text to become a little bit bolder as a result. All right, I've got front lighting on here just to show you that there are a couple flaws in the screen. I found two. I'm going to call them dead pixels. I'm not sure what the equivalent is in the E-Ink world, but there's one, I don't know if the camera can pick it up, but it's just above my fingertip there, right there. And there's one just above my fingertip right there. So two dead pixels. I rarely notice this one, but occasionally I notice this one. My experience with monitors is that you'll get one or two dead pixels, so I don't find that particularly concerning. But just wanted to point that out, that does happen on E-Ink monitors as well. But not a concern, at least from my perspective. As I've noted, I'm not a fan of the speakers on this device, but I wanted to at least share the volume controls of the speaker because it's crazy loud. So we're going to go ahead and start off. We'll start off at level 1. And this is using the monitor speakers. Let's see what that sounds like, and then I'll turn it up a little bit. I'm not sure what happened there. I kept pressing mute and it wouldn't mute, and then it's completely gone off the rails. The speakers are just terrible on this thing, and then the controls make it even worse. Why did that just explode in sound all of a sudden? And look, I'm on what, 6044? I mean, it's blindingly loud at 5. Why do I need to go all the way up? This is crazy. What a mess. What a mess. And why didn't the mute button work? Maybe it's because I was in the... Yeah, that's why. All right. So there you have it. That's basically how this Bigme device operates as a monitor, and hopefully you have a really good sense of that. One observation before I kind of go into my final thoughts about this device, as a monitor anyway. One of the advantages of having refresh modes that are very close to each other, and I'm thinking that the web mode and the video mode are almost the exact same mode. I kind of preferred web mode just a touch more than the video mode. But the advantage of that is that you could set one mode with a certain level of contrast, say at 0, and the other mode at much more contrast, maybe halfway up the scale. And then maybe text mode could actually have contrast all the way to the top. And that way you can actually quickly move between those modes, and they would be different because they have different fundamental settings around the contrast that might prove useful as you're going between different web pages and what have you. So that's one actual advantage. It's almost like you can create just 2 different presets of the same fundamental image, and then the text mode being kind of a third for a very specialized purpose, which is just trying to darken text when it's very light. So just a thought about that. But let me go into, who is this for? And again, I want to emphasize, I'm talking about the monitor aspect of it. I'm going to talk about the PC aspect and other aspects in future videos, but as a monitor, who is this for, and would I recommend it? Well, I think it's pretty fair to say that unless there is a specific reason that someone couldn't use an LCD monitor, and I'm using LCD generically, that means LCD, OLED, LED, and so on. Unless there's a specific reason you couldn't use those types of monitors, you would not use an E-Ink monitor. There are compromises from going to an E-Ink technology versus those technologies, and frankly, those technologies are better for computing. You can do computing tasks using an E-Ink monitor. It's not that you can't. It's not as optimal as with using an LCD. So one example is the mouse. So the mouse was the smoothest on web mode, and it's totally usable. I'm used it for a couple days now, and I never overshoot what I'm trying to click on. And it's pretty easy, but you feel like you're a half step behind what would be the case if you were using an LCD monitor. And obviously the image resolution is much better in an LCD, and you can see that particularly when images are really dark or even really light. You can just make out more details on an LED screen than you can on this E-Ink screen. So barring a special reason, I just don't think that anyone would want to use an E-Ink monitor over an LCD. And, that's not a surprise, right? I think we kind of knew going in to the release of this video that this is a very niche product, and it wouldn't be for many people, and that's certainly borne out to be the case. It's still extraordinary to me how well E-Ink can handle monitor tasks. And as I mentioned, functionally, it's there. It's just not as optimal as an LCD, but you can absolutely use it. I've done web browsing, I've watched videos, I've done my finances, going between web pages and Excel. I worked in Word. All that is absolutely doable There's nothing that you can't do on this device that you could do on an LCD. It's just an LCD is a little bit better. Well, I say nothing, but I'm talking only about home office tasks here. Obviously, when you start moving to things like video production, photo editing, gaming, those are all things you would not do using an E-Ink monitor. So I'm just assuming home office scenarios here. So who's it for then? Well, a lot of times with E-Ink, you do hear the concept of eye strain thrown about. And I think that's kind of the realm where people might be more interested in this monitor. Now, I want to be clear. I think when people use the phrase eye strain, it's a very generic umbrella term. So it encapsulates a lot of scenarios. For most people, you can work with an LCD screen for long periods of time and be perfectly fine. And one way to combat eye strain is to use the 20-20 rule, which is every 20 minutes you look away at a more distant object for at least 20 seconds. And if you can do that, a lot of the eye strain that may be reported out there might be avoided. In other words, there are ergonomic practices that you can put in place that wouldn't warrant needing an E-Ink screen. It's just don't spend as much time staring at the LCD screen and you'll fare better. But again, I think this eye strain umbrella is a very large umbrella, and that's what I just described is a portion of people. But there are other people that have other issues that legitimately require them to reduce or maybe even eliminate the amount of time they use an LCD screen. I think that's a very small number of people that fall into that category, but there are people that seem to fall into that scenario. In that particular case, where you either need to reduce or have no interaction with these types of devices that are shining light at you, then it might be that this type of a monitor would be a good fit for you. Now, I do have to be clear, I've never reviewed alternate technologies, like I haven't reviewed reflective LCDs, for example. So that's an option. Is this better option than that? I have no idea. Also, there's a question of, well, how long will this Kaleido 3 be the leading technology that you could use in monitors as it relates to E-Ink? We don't know that. It appears like it's probably going to be the dominant technology for the next year or two, but there's a lot of energy being put around color. They tried to get Gallery 3, for example, to be a potential solution, and future iterations may indeed evolve into something a little more with a little more utility that maybe could be used in a monitor. But I think there's at least a couple of years, a year or two, until a new technology comes around. So at least in the short run, it doesn't appear like there'll be a better option for a color E-Ink monitor. But how far beyond that, nobody really knows. So a little bit of a risk there if you purchased a monitor, especially given how expensive they are. This all-in-one PC runs roughly $2,000. But if you go with just the monitor, and I don't remember the exact prices, but it's in the neighborhood of $1,500, whether you go with the Bigme or the Daesung monitor, both using the same screen technology. So that's who it would be for. It would be for those people where an LCD is out of the question, but they still need to do some computing, and this is a potential viable solution to that. Outside of that, though, I'm not sure there's a good enough use case to warrant this as a monitor. And again, the next video, I'll dive much more deeply into how this handles home office type tasks that I kind of just talked about. And I will do a review of the computer element of this device. And that will kind of flesh that aspect out a little bit more. And as I also mentioned, there'll be another video on other uses like signage and displaying art. So I'll have different opinions for those things, but in terms of a monitor, that's my thinking around this. If you have any comments or questions, please feel free to put those in the comments, and I will answer as many as I can. All right, hope you found this video informative and maybe even a touch entertaining. And until next time, I'll see you then.